In the quiet stillness of that autumn afternoon, the air carried the scent of fallen leaves and a hint of wood smoke from chimneys. In the distance, Margaret stood by the graveside, her heart heavy with grief. Her son Thomas had been taken too soon. They said a terrible accident had claimed his life. And now here she was, saying goodbye. The closed casket loomed before her, shrouded in mystery. His wife Eleanor had insisted on its citing the severity of his injuries. Margaret's hands trembled as she clutched her worn coat, the one Thomas had bought her years ago for her birthday. A simple gesture that still warmed her memory. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the rustling trees fill her mind with echoes of his laughter from childhood days spent playing in the yard. As the minister's words drifted over the small gathering, Margaret felt a vibration in her pocket. She reached down slowly, her fingers brushing the cold screen of her phone. A text message glowed there from an unknown number, and the words stopped her breath. "I'm alive, don't trust my wife." Her knees weakened, and she steadied herself against a nearby headstone, her mind racing. Thomas alive. The thought was impossible. Yet the message burned into her soul. She glanced toward Eleanor, who stood stoically by the casket, her face a mask of sorrow. Margaret's heart ached with confusion, and a flicker of doubt began to grow. The years had taught Margaret many things about life, about love, and about the quiet betrayals that sometimes hide in plain sight. She remembered her own marriage to Harold, a man of steady hands and gentle smiles, who had passed years ago, leaving her with wisdom etched into her bones. Back then, they had faced their share of secrets, small misunderstandings that they worked through with patience. Now standing here, she wondered if Thomas and Eleanor had carried their own silent burdens. The text felt like a whisper, from the past a call to unravel something she wasn't sure she wanted to face. She stepped away from the crowd, her shoes crunching, softly on the gravel path, and found a bench beneath an old oak tree. The tree's gnarled branches reminded her of her own journey through life, its strength a testament to enduring storms. She read the message again, her thumb hovering over the keys. "Where are you?" she typed, her hands shaking. The reply came swiftly. "Can't say now they're watching. Just don't trust my wife." The words hung in the air like a fog, and Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October breeze. In her mind, she wandered back to the days when Thomas was a boy, full of dreams. She saw him riding his bicycle down the street, the same one she'd kept in the garage long after he'd grown. Those were simpler times when love was a warm kitchen and the smell of freshly baked bread. Eleanor had come into his life later, a kind woman with a quiet grace that Margaret had welcomed. They'd built a home together, raised a family, and Margaret had watched with pride. But now this message cast a shadow over those memories, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been hidden from her. She decided to wait to act, to let the moment settle. The funeral ended with a hush, and people offered their condolences, their voices soft with sympathy. Margaret nodded and smiled, though her thoughts were elsewhere. Eleanor approached, her eyes red from tears, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Margaret," she said, her voice breaking. "He loved you so much." Margaret squeezed her hand in return, feeling the warmth, but also the weight of unspoken words. She wanted to ask, to demand answers, but the wisdom of her years held her back. Sometimes truth needs time to reveal itself, she thought. That evening, Margaret sat in her living room, the fire crackling in the hearth. The room was filled with mementos, a faded photograph of Harold and Thomas on a fishing trip, a knitted blanket she'd made decades ago. She held her phone, staring at the text, wondering what to do. Her heart told her to believe, to trust that her son was out there somewhere. But her mind cautioned her to be careful. She remembered Harold's advice from long ago. When you're unsure, listen to your heart, but check the facts. With a deep breath, she decided to reach out again. The next morning, she drove to Thomas and Eleanor's house, a modest place with a garden she'd helped plant. The roses were still blooming a splash of color against the gray day. Eleanor answered the door, her face pale but composed. "Margaret, come in," she said, stepping aside. They sat in the kitchen, the table strewn with papers and an untouched cup of tea. Margaret spoke gently. "I need to know about Thomas the accident." Eleanor's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but she nodded. "It was sudden," she began. "He was driving home and a truck hit him. The hospital said there was no chance." Margaret listened, her hands folded in her lap. The story sounded rehearsed, and that nagging doubt grew stronger. She thought of the text, the urgency in those words. She didn't press further, instead offering a smile. "I'll be here if you need me," she said, rising to leave. Eleanor's "thank you" was quiet, almost lost in the hum of the refrigerator. As Margaret drove home, she felt a resolve forming. She would find the truth, not out of anger, but out of love for her son. Days turned into weeks, and Margaret began her quiet search. She visited the hospital where Thomas had been taken, speaking to a nurse who remembered the case. The records showed a body identified by Eleanor, but the details were vague. Margaret's heart sank, but she pressed on, visiting the police station next. The officer she spoke to was kind, an older man with graying hair who reminded her of her brother. He pulled the file and frowned. The identification was rushed, he said, and the scene was chaotic. Margaret thanked him, her mind whirling with possibilities. At night, she sat by the window, watching the stars, the same stars she'd shown Thomas as a child. She prayed for guidance, her faith a steady light in the darkness. One evening, another text arrived. "I'm safe, but I need help. Meet me at the old mill tomorrow night." Margaret's pulse quickened, but she felt a surge of hope. The old mill was a place from her youth, a spot where she and Harold had once picnicked. It held memories of love and laughter, and now it might hold her son. The next night she drove through the winding roads, the headlights cutting through the fog. The mill stood silent, its windows dark and empty. She stepped out, her breath visible in the cold air, and waited. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and familiar. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice breaking. He stepped closer, his face bruised but alive. "Mom," he said, pulling her into a hug. The warmth of his embrace erased years of worry, and she held him tight. He told her everything, his voice low and strained. The accident had been staged. Eleanor had wanted his life insurance money. He'd escaped with help from a friend, but had to hide. The closed casket held a substitute, a cruel deception. Margaret's heart ached for the betrayal, but she felt relief too. Her son was alive, and that was enough. They devised a plan to confront Eleanor with evidence and seek justice. But Margaret urged patience. "Let's do this with love," she said, "not hate." In the weeks that followed, they gathered proof and met with a lawyer, a gentleman named Robert, who reminded Margaret of her father. Eleanor was confronted, and the truth came out. She broke down, tears streaming as she confessed. Margaret felt no triumph, only sadness. She reached out, offering forgiveness, a choice born of her years of understanding human frailty. Thomas and Margaret rebuilt their lives together, the bond stronger than ever. They sat often by the hearth, sharing stories of the past and dreams for the future. One evening, as the snow fell outside, Margaret looked at Thomas and smiled. Life had tested them, but love had prevailed. The scars of betrayal would fade, leaving behind wisdom and connection. She thought of Harold, and the lessons he'd left her to trust, to hope, to forgive. And as the fire crackled, she knew that no matter what came, they would face it together. The stars outside shone brightly, a reminder of the enduring light within them all.